welcome to Perfect Night In. I'm your host, Neil Perryman, and this show is basically a rip-off of Desert Island Discs, but instead of music and sand, we offer our guests TV and alcohol. Anyway, my first guest is the writer Steve Berry, probably best known for his sterling work with TV Cream, including a fantastic book about toys, plus several books with Phil Norman dedicated to the crisps, chocolate and junk food of my childhood. So without any further ado, let's meet Steve. Hi Steve, how are you?
I'm very well, Neil, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Perfect Night In, where you're going to share with us your perfect night in front of the TV.
I am. I'm very much looking forward to it. I need a night in.
Can you explain to us what the environment you're in for your perfect night in looks like? I mean, what kind of chair are you sitting in?
I have to have a big leather sofa. I need something where I can effectively sort of take up about 5 different positions during the night. So I can be sitting down at first and sort of curled up at the one end of the sofa with a glass in hand. And then cushions and so on to lie down when I'm feeling a little bit snoozy towards the end, and then somewhere right in the middle. Because my idea of a perfect night in is to watch all this television on sort of Christmas Eve. It has to be, when the long winter nights are drawing in, and there's lots of sort of lights and festivities around. So I've got that kind of image in my mind.
Okay, Steve. So it's 6 o'clock. Let's get your perfect night in started. What's your first choice?
It's Wurzel Gummidge. This programme does, it really reminds me of childhood. In fact, most of the things that I've picked today will remind me of some sort of period in my childhood. I think it's when I was last happy, when I was about 9 years old.
That's a bit sad.
I know, but do you know what? There's a sort of sense that Wurzel Gummidge itself is sort of drenched in melancholy. The programme is just such a brilliant kind of bucolic evocation of a sort of nostalgic British, English even, sort of village mentality that doesn't seem to exist now, and certainly I don't even think really existed then. So I used to read the Wurzel Gummidge books before the TV series came, so it's the first instance I'd ever had of where the TV show was so vastly different from having read, it was better than the novel, but it was so sort of beautifully charming. And I grew up in the northwest of England, quite close to Liverpool, but holidays for me were always in the south. They were always in sort of Devon and Eastbourne and places like that. So to have a lot of shows made in the southern TV region, so you had shows like Famous Five and Wurzel Gummidge, always reminded me of those part of holiday time, of sort of great rolling expanses of fields that you could run across and have adventures, and then hedgerows and orchards and eccentric tramps walking along the road and so on. But the episode I picked is the one that also had the other element of it, which is that it's the one where Wurzel makes a replacement scarecrow because he's being threatened with going on a bonfire. So he makes this terrifying creature called Daft Head.
The only rule I've got for my guests coming on the show is that they should choose something pre-Watershed for the 6 o'clock slot. This is borderline horror movie.
Oh, it's terrifying. I mean, first of all, you've got the elements of, you've got the sort of Frankenstein elements of it. Prometheus bringing life from the soil and creating man, and then you've got the fire at the end. It's like the Wicker Man when they're burning the scarecrow. But this was when Wurzel Gummidge was in its pomp. This is when it was on the front pages of Lookin' every other week. It was a big thing. It was as big as Star Wars. It was as big as the Smurfs. It was the age I was in 1980. I was 9 years old. That went out in February, I think, and my birthday's in March, and I asked for the theme tune record, the one that John Pertwee had recorded.
Hang about, my dears. Won't keep you but a minute. I'm putting my singing head on, you see. Can't sing without my singing head on, can I? That's it. Off we go. Till Mother Nature ends, I'll be Wurzel to my friends. And just like John and Sue, you must speak my language too. Not Yakety, if you please. You must speak in Wurzelese.
This was everything to me then. It was in my head. And I don't think there's a problem with being a little bit scared by kids' TV shows. I mean, if you look at that show now and the way it was made, health and safety would be a nightmare. There are, people were being attacked with pitchforks. There are kids in barnyards. It's like Apaches, but made friendly. And I think I also had my first kind of pre-pubescent crush was on Charlotte Coleman, who played Sue in that. I wanted to play out with Charlotte Coleman. So lots and lots of things really that made me, feel that this would be the perfect show. And very strange as well for me, as probably a kid who spent more of his time watching BBC than ITV, to have chosen an ITV show. But there are just so many nostalgic memories wrapped up in it that it had to be the first one out.
So that episode of Wurzel Gummidge was called Fire Drill, and it aired in February 1980. And for your second choice, we're going to skip forward to 1981.
Now get out of that. I mean, I could have chosen any of the puzzle shows from that era, the ones that were sort of either on kind of BBC One Kids TV, like the like Jigsaw, or BBC Two, like the Adventure Game. But Now Get Out of That was one that I could watch with the family.
Can you explain to anybody who doesn't know what this programme is, what it's about?
It is basically the idea of any kind of sales and marketing teams, team building exercise, away day out in the great British outdoors, turned into a TV show. Two different teams. I think in the early series there were Oxford versus Cambridge. They would get academics, people who probably very good at problem solving but not so good at putting up tents and camping and yomping across the British countryside, to effectively try and sort of do a kind of capture the flag type exercise. The whole thing that kept it together, the whole thing that made it a unique show and a brilliant experience, was Bernard Falk, the TV journalist, newsreader, narrating from the comfort of a BBC studio, watching the adventures unfold.
You'll remember we left the Oxford team working out where they were. We returned to the Oxford team hoping they now know where they are.
Like a kind of David Attenborough figure, kind of commenting on the personality traits, dissecting the characters, giving us little vignettes of what they were like, and really sort of sardonically and sarcastically narrating.
But just look at Zeke. Zeke, remember, is an American. We Brits, well, we don't like to flap, do we? We'll muddle through in the end.
As I say, it was a puzzle-solving show, and those sort of things really got into my head. I've been involved in making shows that have had puzzles in them, sort of kids' TV series back in the days when I used to work in telly. I've written for Only Connect, so I've come up with puzzles to try and fox teams. But this had a sort of a veneer of it was sort of grown-ups doing grown-up things. It was always couched like it was like they were trying to rescue a spy or defuse a nuclear bomb before it went off. But it was all still kind of grown-ups, no kids. It wasn't kids playing at it. It was adults playing in kids' games. And as I say, that meant that I could watch it with my dad, and my dad would enjoy the commentary as much as I did.
What you're going to witness now is a remarkable exercise in Anglo-American relations.
We have to get the car. What are we looking at the map for?
Calm down a minute. Look, let's read the instructions. We don't know what the instructions are from the road. Now look, just calm down.
Derek, would you read it out loud? It says, you may not walk inside the bog area.
Wait a minute.
That's what it says here, walk.
Do not walk into the bog area.
Well, we can lay in the bog area.
On the side, which includes plank and...
Do you know, Zeke's right. He is right. Only the Brits have had enough and they won't even listen to him.
This is early reality TV show. Just in terms of its format, there had been reality TV shows before, but they were always done by the Open University, and it was people adopting, they're living like Iron Age man, so they would be sort of acting the roles, and almost like they wouldn't be being themselves. Whereas this, it was presenting somebody with an outdoor challenge, forget your Bear Grylls, etc. This is, can Fiona, who's the secretary in the managing director's office, skin and cook a rabbit and kill it, eat it, and not get sick?
We've given her 2 dead rabbits, a pot, some onions, carrots and tea bags. It's more than enough to help them survive their first night out in the wild.
But the whole thing also had a sort of low-budget kind of vibe to it before. I think now, if you did it nowadays, they try and showbiz it up a bit. You'd probably have somebody chasing them and helicopters and all this kind of thing. The key thing was that it was something that I could watch with my dad, and again, we both had our tea. We could sit there. It was pre-homework sort of telly, and both enjoy it in our own way.
Okay, Steve, it's 7 o'clock and we're skipping forward yet another year, this time to 1982.
Three, 2, 1. It was based on Uno, Dos, Tres from Spanish TV. Again, another show that has puzzles and requires some engagement with it. That you need to try and solve clues to do it. But this, had everything. It's interesting that all of these shows, all of these ones that have lodged in my memory, have all come from a certain period of my life, and it's that sort of very late childhood. So probably when you're old enough to remember telly, but not teenage enough to be really arch about a Saturday night entertainment show. It's a delight from start to finish. They throw everything in, including the kitchen sink.
This fantastic programmable dishwasher, compactor and computerized split-level microwave oven.
So you start with the quiz, and that my favourite part of the whole show, if I'm honest, is just the sound effects that play in the background when they're trying to answer the quiz questions. I just, that little sort of tick-tock, tickety-dee sort of sound effects that go behind it. I've tried for ages to try and find that cue somewhere. For me, it's more tension-inducing and more resonant than the countdown 30-second clock. It's just to have that whole kind of ticking thing. It's got all the clocks in there.
Cawthon.
Don't know.
Coe.
Sebastian.
Sheen.
Barry.
Smallwood.
Kathy.
Botham.
Ian.
McEnroe.
John.
Ted Rogers, just charming, could get away with doing the worst quality jokes. I mean, ad-libs that aren't even jokes, they're just remarks, or repeating back to the contestants what they've said to him, but always happy to be there. And that show just made me happy. So the one that we've picked is the space edition. It's 1982. I mean, we're talking about a year before Return of the Jedi. So the kind of films and the movies and the things that you would see in Buck Rogers in the 25th century. But you are getting instead
Pat Coombs.
Pat Coombs playing. Guess what? Pat Coombs is playing. Oh, she's playing a tea lady. She's dressed like Hilda Ogden. She is. Of course she is. But there's this beautiful moment where she's telling Ted that she's sort of in character as herself rather than as the Pat Coombs char lady character, and she's telling Ted that she's seen him perform live, and she loses confidence in the anecdote.
I saw you live and in cabaret last week. Never seen you before.
Did you enjoy
live
it?
and in cabaret? Yes, I did, but it was different,
What do you
very
mean?
different from the way you are on 321.
Really?
Mm.
Well, how different?
Well, sort of some of the jokes.
What do you mean, some of the jokes?
Well, I mean,
Well, what was wrong with them?
I wouldn't know how to describe them, really, like naughty, but nice.
Okay.
And everyone's going, yes, we remember the fresh cream cakes adverts that you did, Pat. And she gets this little ripple at the end of it. And Roy Kinnear is in it as well, fresh from his appearance in Blake 7, and dressed in what looks like the same kind of glittery gold costume, but just still being Roy Kinnear. It doesn't matter whether you put Roy Kinnear in space or in, you know, a building site. He's Roy Kinnear.
And what's wrong with my mother?
Nothing's wrong with her, but I mean, a weekend with her is like a close encounter with the Third Reich.
And then he does a bit of business as well with a sandwich, and sort of says, "Oh, it's a reference to," and then that sort of tails off. You don't know why he's mumbling through a sandwich. There's probably some character that he did. Again, they're all talking about adverts and things that were obviously really topical and popular at the time.
For me, the highlight has to be Lipstick, which is like Hot Gossip but tepid.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they do this incredible dance routine to, what was it, Space Invaders.
They don't even dance to a particular hit of the day. It's not like they go, Starship Troopers or something like that. It's
something they've cobbled together that afternoon. It isn't on a Casio keyboard.
Been put together by the house, but Yorkshire TV house band with all of the different, as many. Have you got a synthesizer, Jeff? Yeah, they can go beep 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 beep. That'll do. Just turn that into a song, and of course they do it, and they're wearing the glittery wigs, which could not tinsel. They look like tinsel, don't they? Those wigs couldn't be more 1982. They don't wear dealy boppers, which I was expecting, but it is. Yeah, they had loads of those bands. The Brian Rogers Connection, the Gentle Sex, but spelt like secretaries, abbreviated. Lipstick, I have to admit, I'd completely forgotten. They get Neil Innes on, bless him, looking exactly like Matt Johnson from The with his guitar around him, dressed in a spacesuit with a fish inside the space helmet, looking like a goldfish swimming around in a bowl. And he's there. I think, to be honest with you, I know lots of people have very fond memories of Neil Innes and the Ruttles and Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. I think my memory of Neil Innes starts with that episode. But bless him, he's doing his best to be showbiz with Ted, and reading out the clues. Those clues.
They're married and off on a trip, combining and then coming out. If that's a star clue, here's another. Roy's Middle's a big one, no doubt.
No doubt.
The only one that I got was the bin, which was basically because Roy had brought on a ring which was like an O shaped, and then there was some reference in the clue to the big middle, or his big middle. So the big middle of Roy is 0, a big fat 0. It has to be the bin. But there's no reason why that couldn't have been. It's a big 0, looks like a wheel. If you had this wheel around 4 corners of the globe, it's the car. I'm watching it at the end, and of course on this particular one, and the penultimate clue, the couple reject a brilliant holiday to Florida, but then they lose that holiday, and there's obviously disappointment because you're thinking that's the star prize, and then they come on with the last one, and the clue ends up being like, kind of, if you have to take dust away from stardust, what do you end up with? Star. Yes, it's the star prize. And they get the cut, and the delight on the woman's face, and I was clapping, and I'm a grown man sitting there going, that's fantastic. I just feel so pleased for that couple. And that was the beauty of that show. It was a proper feel-good show. There was no cynicism in it at all.
We're up to about 8 o'clock now. Do you fancy some crisps?
Yes, thank you very much. I got to choose my own.
Yeah, what snacks have you chosen?
Well, in keeping with the era, I would like to have a big bag of Nibbit wheels, please. Those are those reformed potato snack in the shape of wheels that I think were basically late 70s, early 80s. The closest you can get nowadays is there's an M&S kind of share bag of sour cream and onion flavoured shapes, and some of the shapes inside those bags are wheels. So if you want to sit there and slowly, like the rock bands of the 1970s, just get all of the wheels out of the packet and put them into a bowl for me, then I'll have those.
Would you like a chocolate snack?
Oh, well, you've got to have Matchmakers. If you're watching telly, it's got to be working your way through an old-style box of Matchmakers.
What's tiny and thin, with a pronounced crispness and a character? all of its own.
Your mother. 70 sticks of chocolate. Orange, peppermint, coffee. Matchmakers. As relaxed as the people who eat them.
So now you're reclining on the sofa with your crisps and your chocolate. It's about 8 o'clock and we're going to get more Christmassy now because you said you feel like Christmas.
This is just simply called Kate. It is the Kate Bush 1979 Christmas special, and I just basically had to get some Kate Bush in here somehow. So there aren't many TV specials that are all just non-stop Kate Bush, and this is her early era, so it's all the material is all off her first album and actually in advance of her second album, and there's a couple of tracks off her third album. So a lot of the material that she ended up releasing in those first 3 years is all stuff that she'd written as a teenager, and it isn't just her just straightforwardly sitting at the piano and performing. Because it's Kate Bush, she has to do the full theatrical dance and mime and costume sort of stuff.
Is there any particular favourite track that she performs that you like?
Yeah, one of my favourite Kate Bush tracks of all time is actually Violin, which again, it was written when she was a teenager. It was performed by her when she was part of the KT Bush Band, which was a band that was put together especially for her, in order that she could spend time performing live and rehearsing live before she even went on to record. So this is the sort of the very young pre-fame Kate Bush going around working men's clubs in London and playing with a band. And it has got that kind of slightly rockist element to it. It's got a guitar solo in the middle. It's very atypical Kate Bush track actually. But it is one of my favourites for those reasons. And of course, if she's going to perform it on a BBC special, she has to have two dancers dressed up as giant violins, like some kind of fever dream behind her. And to me, this is the best version of Kate Bush. This is the slightly, I know people sort of refer to her as ethereal now, but for me, I think she was arty. She was still sort of connected to the rock kind of scene at the time. She had elements of folk from the early 70s and late 60s. Again, there was sort of something very English about her. There was a slight Bowiness. There was just the most natural form, if you like, the one before she sort of started adopting other personas, and especially sort of in the 80s when most people discovered Kate for the first time was to see the sort of glam, big hair, Hounds of Love kind of Kate Bush. For me, this is just I don't know. There's just something awkward and unrehearsed, and I know it is massively rehearsed, but it's gawky. It doesn't have polish, and it's very raw. And I'm young when this goes out. She was the kind of the teenage crush for me. This is the sort of time when I got very obsessed with music and art and the people doing it, and she became the musical love of my life from that period onwards.
Oh, bless. So we're up to 9 o'clock now, a change of gears, and the next programme you've chosen is also just a name.
Kelly Monteith. I feel sad that Kelly Monteith has sort of been forgotten by. If you're writing the history of comedy and comedy series in the UK, he's very much fallen into the cracks, which I think is a very, very deep shame, because, as we know, there is a period from sort of the early 80s when alternative comedy emerges, and it's so aggressive, and it's wearing Doc Marten boots, and it's been university educated, and it's polemic, and it's strident, and it's violent, and it burst onto the screens from sort of 82 right through to 85. So you get the young ones, and you get Saturday Live, you get Alexei Sale, and so on. But prior to that, you had the kind of university-educated, smart, not the 9 o'clock news kind of comedy, and then slotted into exactly that 9 o'clock BBC Two period, that time slot, for 4 years or so, you get Kelly Monteith. And again, this is a show that all of the time we would watch. My dad and I would watch all of the comedy. He was great. He introduced me to Hitchhikers. He introduced me to Dave Allen. He introduced me to lots of the comedy shows that I've already named. But Kelly Monteith seems to just get completely forgotten. And there's just so much about what he does in that series that is groundbreaking. He does the Gary Shandling thing of breaking the fourth wall. And talking, he's within a set of his home, and he's talking directly to the audience at home. That he's doing that kind of Dave Allen style of rambling anecdote, except he's doing it standing up, and he's walking around his house. He's just doing he's putting his tie on, he's getting dressed, he's chatting, he's having breakfast, and so on. And it is effectively just a series of stand-up routines strung together with a few sketches that sort of make literal the subjects that he's talking about.
I'll tell you what made me start thinking about it, is doctors. I suddenly thought about doctors. I thought, now, wait a second. Doctors treat all kinds of contagious diseases. They're around people with all kinds of these contagious diseases, and yet they hardly ever get them. You know, I mean, if they did, they wouldn't want to treat anybody. Doc, I think I got bubonic plague. Get the hell away from me.
It's probably the first person that I remember laughing out loud at so much that I was silent, that I was wheezing and I couldn't catch my breath because I was laughing so much. And we as a family, we went to see him at the Southport Floral Hall. And he had a routine about a dog being sick, and that everybody knows when your dog is sick, you must sort of test his nose to see if his nose is warm. And he does a whole routine that lasts about 5 minutes of people going up and going, honk, oh, his nose is warm, he must be... And the dog's just going, leave me alone, I just want to throw up and be sick. And he masterfully told that to the audience. Again, he was probably wearing the tuxedo with the bow tie. He had the trappings of an old-style stand-up, but he had the material of a modern-day stand-up. The only other people I ever saw at Southport Floral Hall doing comedy were Ken Dodd, and Ben Elton and Rick Mayall. So for me, he sits in that kind of memory. And the reason I think that people have forgotten him is because there was this sort of sense that he was just another one of those kind of acceptable middle-of-the-road comics that would happily, sit alongside Cannon and Ball or A Little and Large. He was largely inoffensive. The theme music for the show is composed by Ronnie Hazelhurst, and he's done that usual trick of taking the name of the person he's writing about and turning it into a tune, so you get Kelly Monteith, da da da, Kelly Monteith. So it had that sort of vibe about it was all just a little bit comfortable, it was all just a little bit middle class, and some of the sketches were a bit long, and some of the actors that you would expect to see them everywhere else, probably Michael Sharville Martin and the usual people will turn up in guest roles. Royce Mills is probably playing a businessman, but the material itself, and I think he was a strong stand-up comedian, and I think that it's just a shame. I imagine that shows like A Kick Up the 80s and Naked Video just sort of trampled all over that slot and made him ultimately just a little bit forgotten.
Yes, I am. And you've given me a great idea for an Execusuit sketch.
Sketch? Do you mean a drawing?
No, a bit, a hunk, a funny piece.
I don't understand.
Well, let me give you the premise, see? This new young executive, right, comes to work, first day in the job, wants to make a good impression, comes to work wearing his brand new Execusuit.
Well, I don't think that's very funny.
I haven't finished yet. Comes into the executive dining room, an waitress, also on her first day in the job, also wants to make a good impression, comes in, trips over his execu shoes, spills a hot tureen of execu soup in his lap, soaking right through to his execu shorts and scalding his potential. Well, I know it doesn't sound funny, but see, it's the pricking of the bubble of corporate dignity.
There's an entire series which is about what his life is like as a comedian in a popular TV series, filming sketches on location, which is all filmed on... So the whole series is filmed on location, as he's filming sketches to go into the series that he's talking about while he's talking to us. So it gets very meta textual in that sense. Very, sort of, there's the sort of thing that Stephen Moffat would do with Joking Apart, and everything he's ever written since. There's sort of layers and layers and layers, and it was just this was written by Neil Shand. This was written by the guy who used to write Mike Yarwood and used to write Dave Allen. So you can almost there are moments when you can see Kelly Monteith his voice comes out of it, and you can see when he's sort of being slightly restricted by the trappings of a BBC Two studio-bound early 1980s show, multi-camera show. And the worst thing for me was that he just disappeared. There's absolutely no reason. Yeah, he probably did do Dennis O'Connor, but then I think he was Canadian. He's probably just gone. I believe he lives in sort of Florida or somewhere now. So he's probably doing cruise ships or something. But I think it's a shame because for me he was one of the voices of early 80s, what I would deem alternative comedy.
Okay, given it's 9:30 and well past the watershed, do you fancy some alcohol?
Thank you very much. As it's Christmas Eve, and as I've talked a lot about my dad, I think I would go with my dad's favourite drink, which was Bacardi and Coke, which I can drink until the cows come home and not get too drunk. And it just reminds me of holidays. Probably because my dad used to give me little sips of it when I was on holiday.
I used to hate the adverts in the cinema. You know, the Bacardi adverts in the cinema, they went on for ages.
This is the 9:42 commute.
That's it.
This is the bus off. Yeah, that's just, yeah.
Peckham, on a wet Saturday afternoon. Next door's Budgie.
Yeah, don't judge a product by how it's advertised. That's all I would say.
Okay, Steve, so you're reclining on the sofa with a Bacardi and Coke, and your next choice is...
This is GBH.
So why have you chosen GBH, Steve?
This is the perfect era for me. I'd just gone to university. I'd grown up in Liverpool in the 80s, so I had seen the rise of the militant tendency. I had seen the shiny, suited socialists who looked like they had a little bit too much money, and I'd seen the riots and everything like that. And this is one of those fantastic political conspiracy thrillers, beautifully written by Alan Bleasdale and just perfectly acted. The cast, Robert Lindsay, Michael Palin, Lindsay Duncan, just everybody is pitch perfect all the way through. It hits every note, it hits every beat. It is just one of the most perfect dramas ever made.
So it's 1991, Channel 4. Could you summarise the basic plot in a nutshell without giving any spoilers away?
Well, it is effectively what is happening in politics nowadays. So you've got the rise of a very far left council in Liverpool. At the same time, all the sort of the centrist dads are being shunted out of the party, and then you've got this figurehead, this kind of too cool, too smooth politician called Michael Murray, who's very clearly modelled on Derek Hatton, played by Robert Lindsay, and it effectively charts how the left shows how it's infiltrated by far-right activists who pose as agitators from the left, and effectively it maps this kind of breakdown of Michael Murray. But at the same time, it's an ensemble piece. There's sort of 3 or 4 stories. You've got Michael Palin as this kind of old teachers union rep who is feeling disenfranchised, and he's eventually sort of forced face to face with Michael Murray.
Because here we all are, living under the most reactionary, democratically elected government we've ever known, in a Labour-controlled city where all animals are equal, but some councillors are more equal than others, where too often lions are led by donkey jackets, living proof that the further left you go, the more right-wing you become. But we have to behave with dignity and with honour.
The climax episode for me is episode 4, which is called Message Sent, and it takes place in a hotel, which is clearly modelled on the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, and there's sort of all sorts of political meetings going on and personal meetings going on, but at the same time there is a Doctor Who convention happening in the hotel.
Jeff, where do you keep your Durex? What? Where do you keep your Durex?
bloody wallet.
No, the Durex for the machine.
In the machine.
It's empty.
Durex, the biggest exterminator of them all! Exterminate! Exterminate! Ow!
It's based on something that happened in real life, and this is why, having watched this in 1991, looking at it and going, hang on, this reminds me very much of 1986's MonsterCon 2 convention that I was at, where a whole bunch of Doctor Who monsters who were in one side of the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, kind of at the end of the night, everyone had a few drinks and the guests are all moving around. All these blokes dressed as monsters, including people who are quite well known in Doctor Who circles these days, like Nicholas Pegg and Jim Sangster. Me dressed as a unit soldier, along with a Cyberman, a Silurian, a Sontaran, invaded the other half of the hotel where there was a wedding taking place. And I remember at one point I was just sort of chatting to this girl who was a guest of the wedding, looking down onto the dance floor where this couple had just got married and watching all these Doctor Who monsters dancing in amongst the guests. And I was talking to her and saying, do you know the people getting married? And my recollection is a little vague. So either I was talking to, or it was the wedding of, the niece of Alan Bleasdale.
Jeff, it's the one with the pompadour.
Hey?
The barman who's robbing you. It's the one with the pompadour.
How do you know that?
Because whenever we come in here, Teddy gives him a tenner, and he gives us free drinks all night.
Free drink!
So he lifted this real life, very surreal event and plonked it right into the middle of GBH. And it is at the moment when you think it's one of the most surreal things happening. And then all these Doctor Who monsters and Daleks and so on are effectively a kind of vivid portrayal of Michael Murray's breakdown. But of course, me watching that thinking, hang on. And I knew, the weird thing is that I knew some of the people who were on the screen as well. So they obviously got the same Doctor Who club members, the people that I knew from back then. I heard a rumour that Una McCormack is one of the Doctor Who fans, and I also recognised on screen a mate of mine called Gary Cullen, who's dressed as Peter Davison. And then there's one scene where Michael Murray sort of turns around and he's developed all of these different nervous tics, one of which is a wink, and he sort of turns around and looks at one of the Doctor Who's and he inadvertently winks. And this Doctor Who dressed as Tom Baker is a chap I know called John Field, and he gets a real extreme close-up as he winks back at him. It's like this. Imagine I've gone to university, I've sort of left my my kind of Doctor Who club days behind. I'm trying to reinvent myself as some kind of cool, sporty guy who likes music and girls. And then there's this drama on, and there's all of these people that I know recreating a scene from my childhood. It was I'm not saying it led to my breakdown, but it was one of the most surreal moments of my life.
If it was up to me, actually, if it was my perfect night in, it would be all 7 episodes of GBH. It is probably my favourite drama. I watch it once a year.
It nails that kind of militant tendency, that hard left political outlook, the idea of the purity, and the fact that it can be so infiltrated, and to see the echoes of it in the present day. I think everybody who has any interest in politics whatsoever should be forced to watch GBH.
GBH takes us up to 10:45, Steve, and I believe we're going to finish your perfect night in with a movie.
I have chosen Steptoe and Son.
So, Steve, how old were you when you first saw Steptoe and Son, the movie?
I'm not sure where I was when I saw the movie. I definitely remember the TV sitcom before this, but it would have been in childhood, which is a bit strange because it is a little bit ruder than the TV version. To be honest with you, we could be watching any of those movies. We could be watching Are You Being Served? It could be a Carry On movie. It could be Man About the House. But I think Steptoe and Son does everything that I want from a TV sitcom that's been turned into a film. So we have all the establishing shots, you know, the beats that you get at the start of the story, because they have to retell the entire story from the beginning. So you have to set them up as the two totters who live together and that they hate each other. But you have very swiftly move on then to the idea that they go out for a night at a working men's club and they get to see a bit of crumpet and watching the stripper and so on. And it has in common with pretty much every film that I would have watched throughout my childhood and teenage years, from George Formby to the Likely Lads to the Carry-Ons. The idea that it doesn't matter how ugly, clumsy, poor, thick or damaged the bloke is, that there will be a woman somewhere who will come along and rescue him. And in this case it's the stripper, played by Caroline Seymour, who is the woman who rescues Harold from his pit of despair, and in keeping with every movie of that time, takes him on holiday. So it's the honeymoon. So you even get to go abroad and take some time in Spain. And again, this is kind of baked into my history as well, because my parents, when they met and went on holiday, they went to Benidorm. I have all these photographs of my parents on their honeymoon, but they went to Paris for a weekend, and then only later did I find out that, having thought for years that I was conceived on their honeymoon, turns out I was conceived the summer before in Benidorm.
Thank you. Welcome to the Hotel Miramar. Are those your bags over there?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Oh, come on, hurry up.
I'll leave off. It was your fault we missed the bus.
But we wouldn't have missed the bus if you hadn't have shouted. Gibraltar is British as we got off at the airport. Half an hour in the customs trying to explain in Spanish that you was local, motto local.
I knew we should have gone to Bognor. They speak English there.
Of course, there's a sleazy rep who seduces the woman. And of course, then they have to go home. To be honest with you, I don't really care a great deal about the plot or the jokes of these things. It's more a sense of the ambience and the atmosphere. To be honest with you, it's more the familiarity that appeals to me, and there's something quite comfortable about those kind of sitcoms, especially those that are even as a child I seem to identify with adults, male adults in the middle of a midlife crisis. I wanted to be Tom Good for years. I think, as an 8-year-old, I'd look at him and think, oh, wouldn't it be great to be 40 and wearing a jumper?
You bloody fool.
What's wrong with getting married?
Nothing to a decent girl, but not one like her. She's a stripper.
What's that got to do with it?
They're not for marrying, they're for looking at.
Oh, come on. You said yourself. And keep it going as long as you can.
Oh, I didn't mean marry her. I meant give her one now and again. A bit on the side. I don't mind that.
I don't want her as a bit on the side. I'm going to marry her. In church. Properly.
Over my dead body.
Yep, necessary. The vicar's going to be a bit confused, but that's up to him.
And then, of course, when they come back from this holiday, they've split up. There is just this tragic moment when Harold is reading through all of the letters, and the postcards have been backed up through the postal service, and he gets them all in one day. And over a couple of minutes as he reads through them all, he realises that she's run off with the rep, and Albert goes from sort of gloating to very sympathetic and empathetic. But then there's this just beautifully tragic moment.
Don't you start feeling sorry now? It's what you've always worked for, isn't it? What you've always wanted.
I didn't do anything.
You didn't have to. It was there. You're always there.
And I thought that is such their relationship. Just that there are people in the world who just seem to have a ball and chain around their ankle, their tails trapped in the door. They just can't get away from their family. They can't get away from their upbringing. They can't get away from their social class. So I think that's a great way to go to bed on Christmas Eve before waking up and handing out presents. It's just to sort of, you end up feeling grateful for the things that you do have.
So this film takes us right up to midnight, so it's actually Christmas Day now. So Merry Christmas, Steve.
Merry Christmas, Neil. Yeah, I hope you had a lovely time.
And there's an entertaining lineup tonight on Steve Berry's Perfect Night In, starting at 6 o'clock with Wurzel Gummidge, followed by Now Get Out of That. At 7, Ted Rogers and Dusty Bin are back with 321, and Kate's here at 8, whoever she is. At 9, it's the irrepressible Kelly Monteith, and there's a classic episode of Alan Bleasdale's memorable drama GBH at 9:30. We round off the evening with Steptoe and Son, the movie, at 10:45, and that's Steve Berry's Perfect Night In tonight, here on this podcast.
So Steve, my final question to you, if you could share your perfect night in with anyone, who would you choose?
Do you know what? Because I think it needs to be an education, I will choose to share it with both of my children, aged 8 and 3. And I think, first of all, they'll enjoy staying up that late. And secondly, these are very important programmes with very important lessons that they need to see. So they might not enjoy it, but by heck, I'm going to make sure that they see all these shows.
Steve, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Neil.